Welcome to the Business End of Agility podcast, hosted by New Zealand's Business Agility Meetup community. We're here to bring you real-world stories from innovative organisations and forward-thinking leaders around the globe. We're going to explore all facets of business agility, from adaptive leadership and evolving company cultures to emerging ways of working, processes and technologies. I'm your host for the session, Bianca, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to this episode of the Business Agility podcast, the business end of agility. Our guest today has received several national and international awards for his work and research in future of work, HR thought leadership, social entrepreneurship, and employment and labour policy. And today, Kevin Empey is going to be sharing some of those insights with us. He is listed as one of HR's most influential thinkers in 2022 and is also the founder and managing director for Work Matters, an international future of work consulting and training firm, which was set up in 2017 to help business leaders and HR practitioners and employees shape and navigate the changing world of work, which is, of course, our favorite topic. He's also the author of Thrive in the Future of Work and a regular contributor to HR and business publications on this topic. As a side note, which I found very interesting, Kevin is also the founder of WorkLink, an internationally recognized not-for-profit, which focuses on coaching and mentoring organizations set up to help unemployed job seekers into full-time employment. Kevin, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much, Bianca. Thank you. Thank you for that. How are
I'm
you?
not sure how you find time to sleep with all of the stuff that you do.
Well, it's busy, but I suppose that's the nature of things these days. And some just interesting areas I've been. It's more of an accidental tourist through that future of work topic, that I have, and I've taken it's taken me down such interesting paths, since I left corporate life 2017 or so, and just taking that sort of lead of what's changing in the world of work, and then that's brought me down the agility kind of avenue. It's brought me down the unemployment kind of side in terms of more social policy, but also around just future of work strategy and how we as humans are are coping with all the changes that are going on. So I guess it's just an interesting kind of variety of topics that I've been lucky enough to get involved in.
What particular sparked your interest in the future of work?
I guess probably in my sort of 20, 30 years now, I guess in the whole people and leadership space. So when I was doing a lot of people and leadership strategy for Willis Towers Watson, one of those global kind of HR and benefits firms, and really through those noughties. So it was probably around 2015 or so, I really started to reflect and say, gosh, there's been so much change has been going on in the last 10, 15 years, since I suppose 2004 or 5. And I guess with the whole internet side of things, iPhone, smartphone, that the whole speed of change and complexity just seemed to be going at a pace that we had never really experienced before. I had never experienced before. And I could see that in the projects. If people were talking about changing the performance management system or going through an organization review or looking at job structures, we seem to be struggling with those traditional kind of practices and processes and structures of organizations, and people management kind of processes were struggling. They were like it was like they were 20th century sort of processes dealing with the 21st century challenges. And I just got quite interested in that. I said, where is this going? If there's no sign of pace of change or complexity or uncertainty getting any easier, so are we looking at quite a fundamental shift in how and where we do our work, for instance, and in how we are coping with this constant change? So I guess a lazy label for that evolving, changing world of work was this label future of work. So I just started to grapple. I joined that and got into thinking about that and took some time out to study it, etc. And so that's probably was the spark. Was it there's something going on here that requires maybe a different approach?
Yeah, and the traditional tools just not seeming to really address it or be able to.
Struggling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
We talk about future of work a lot. You hear it in sound bites all over the
Yeah,
show. What does it really mean when we talk about
yeah.
future of work?
It's funny how such a basic but powerful question that is, because as I said to you, I think when I started to look at it, and I I was aware of all the hype and the noise. This is
Mm,
going back, what, 7, 8, 9 years now, and even then, a lot of hype and noise, and it was like anybody selling stuff in the whole work was talking about future of work in their terms. So I said, well, that's not really helpful here. So good old academia, took some time out to do a master's on this piece, this research on this topic, and soon realized that there was no definition of future of work. It wasn't. It was a label of convenience that we use, to describe all of this stuff, whether it be robotics or generations at work or speed of change and remote working and whatever, gig economy. Everything was just thrown into this kind of
mm,
bucket called future of work. Um, and and I suppose it was just helpful maybe to capture, some of those big changes. So started to kind of maybe look at it a bit more. To answer your question, I guess the thing about future of work, it's for me sort of resonates on two different frequencies. There's sort of some 3 or 4 long-term trends that are continuing to shape technology, which we've mentioned, and we're now in the AI chapter of that whole side of things. But there's so many converging technologies that are impacting how and where we work. Demographics, and people living longer, working longer. Societal shifts around work and working life and attitudes and the sustainability agenda. So there's these long term plays, and then there's these short term, I suppose, items too, like what's been brought onto us through COVID. So suddenly this whole remote hybrid working,
mm.
went into accelerated. It was already happening, but it was all accelerated. We're going through a skills kind of discussions at the moment. We're talking about AI. Um, so you get in the future of work, you've got these long-term trends, but then you've got interspersed with these more short-term bursts of attention or acceleration on these topics. Um, so they're the kind of things. Bianca, but in terms of definition, I'll offer one to you because it might be helpful for our discussion. Because it just struck me that this topic deserved, in order to help make sense of it with leadership teams, and HR community and stuff, it needed some parameters around which to try to deal with it. To
Mm.
create a definition so that we knew what problem we were trying to solve or whatever. I and because work is more than just the employee side. It's about how we mobilize work. It's about how we deploy work. It's about how we execute work and automate work. Therefore, for me, it's a fusion. The future of work is a fusion of three things. It's actually about business adaptability, in terms of our business model and how we are going to source work, how we mobilize work to meet a challenge or an opportunity in the marketplace, right? So it's about business adaptability, number one. It's about the internal issue and agenda two in terms of organizational agility. So it's about how we are able to mobilize internally or respond internally to organize work, and also to deploy resources effectively and at pace and speed. So there's the business adaptability, organizational agility, and thirdly, the changing nature of work and working life that you see in the society. And I think if you put those three things together, you've got a bit of a definition that you can work with to then say to an organization, okay, how are we dealing with these three? How are we dealing with
Yes.
this formula?
Mm.
Um, and how do we make sense of that for us, those three aspects: business adaptability, organizational agility, and changing nature of work. Because you can't solve for everything. An organization can't. It's got to filter out what elements of those three aspects are important for them, and then try to create a bit of a story or a narrative around that.
That's very useful because it's quite often easy to go, well, the future of the work is in the future, so we won't worry about it
Well, that's
now.
been a problem. That's been a problem. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly right. Exactly. And in fact, Bianca, I don't know, we tend not to talk about future of work. We really talk about the changing nature of work now, when we
Yes.
talk about this, because to your very point, and I think COVID and hybrid definitely have helped with this because and sometimes people I talk to people and they talk about future of work, and when you ask them what they mean, they talk about hybrid working is future. Okay, it's a little bit there's a little bit more going on there. So I think in order to bring it to the present and to actually try to make things happen, and to investigate the changes that we may need to make, I think that the changing nature of work, the changing world of work, is probably a more realistic term than the future of work, and that tends to be where we operate.
It helps to bring a little bit more
Mm,
immediacy
mm,
and
mm,
urgency to the conversation, doesn't it?
mm. But
So, of all those,
there's always been a future of work, though, hasn't there? So I suppose that's the other thing
yes,
about this thing.
yes.
The work has always changed, and we've always adapted. And so the some folks might like to kind of create urgency that this future of work is something urgent and it's something present and it's never been here before. It's been there before. Um, I don't know if you agree, but I just get a sense that work is changing at a pace, and with complexity that we've never experienced before. So therefore, it sort of warrants our attention as to how we proactively respond, if you like, to these trends, as opposed to just to react to them, as they hit us.
Yes,
Mm,
yes. I suppose in traditional ways of working, the pace of change was slow enough that the best approach was best practices. So you could just get
100%.
really good at the same things. And so our capabilities tend to lie in that and not in rapid adaptation, as you were talking about
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, I agree with you that there was more time to maybe not to be the leader. We could sort of wait and see how others were adapting, and then maybe copy those practices and so on. And we had time to maybe test out options and so on. But now it feels like we actually have to move at a pace, uh, and just hope that we're in the right territory. And I guess that's where the sort of whole agility piece comes
Mm.
into it, doesn't it? That sort of sense and respond, and that feedback, and that MVP idea, and all of that really does resonate, I think, with the future of work. And that's how I came across the whole agile movement. Even though I had a background in 1990s technology, I had long since left the technology side of things. In the early 2000s, and wasn't even aware of the agile movement, until I started to study future of work and the consequential issue around agility, and therefore, there was these folks over here doing this agile stuff. What's that about? So it's very interesting how those worlds have, if you like, converged, I believe. Mm.
And so, in the agile space, in the same vein, often people are talking about experiments. What's the
Mm.
bets that we're making because it's not about following those best practices. You're trying to sense and respond
Mm.
live in real time in the market. What else is the kind of parallels that you're seeing from a agility perspective and future of work? And what is it about agility that's most important? Because there's lots of talk in the market these days around, well, agile is dead, so we don't
Mm.
need to worry about that anymore. What's your thoughts on agility in a little bit more detail and why it's relevant for our future of work?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because sometimes you talk about agility in the context of an organizational capability and even a strategy for your future of work preparedness and so on, and you get that glazed look and say, "Oh no, no, that's the agile stuff. We don't, we and whoa, 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 hang on a second, let's roll back a minute." So it's a very interesting. Once I wrote a piece once that agility has got a PR problem, because almost it just the subject of agility and organizational agility and even adaptiveness can get hijacked by that whole thing. But I'm a great defender of it too, of that agile piece, because I think, in fairness to the agile movement, if you like, we it's in the technology and software, all the origins that we know about. It was in the technology space that I suppose probably was the first part of an enterprise that were confronted with the uncertainty, the pace of change, the complexity, that these linear kind of sequential kind of waterfall, if you like, ways of doing things that the rest of the organization was happily doing in its 20th century sort of modus operandi. Those approaches just were not working, right?
Yeah.
So the software movement came up with some responses to that, some practices, some rituals, routines. And I think that's very instructive now. Though, where you and I, for instance, met, I think was when we were talking about, well, what's this new world of work, and the future of work implications for the HR community in terms of what they're trying to
Mm,
do within their organizations, and the whole idea about agile HR. And for me, how that's probably evolved over the recent years is that those ways of working have become so kind of common now, or understood and needed, that we really refer to them as ways of working now, as
yes.
opposed to agile or design thinking or lean, or even hybrid now, for instance, is another label, if you like, that has been around now for a little while, post COVID, that I'm seeing just drift away from the lexicon now. And we're just talking about ways of working that are just helping us
Mm,
get stuff done because we feel overwhelmed, or we're just not, something's not right in terms of our workflows. We're burnt out. There's too much. We haven't been able to regulate work. And when we look at that and we go in and do our work in terms of team coaching and ways of working, optimization and design with companies, and guess what? We end up using, you know, agile
mm,
practices and principles and values and rituals and routines and retrospectives and, MVPs and experimentation, huge back feedback loops, all of that transparency of work, and of course technology being
yeah.
in that allowing table. So it is interesting that the kind of new ways of working that are helping people to adapt to the changing world of work, at team level, and even at functional level, and even at enterprise level. I find, correct me if I'm wrong, if you see anything different, but I see them leaning on those kind of the foundations of what the agile kind of thinking was all about.
Yes, I mean, I agree. And it's certainly a toolkit for things that help you to sense and respond. Without that
Yes,
transparency, do you really have the right data? If you don't have the customer centricity, are you really building the right thing? If you don't have the right practices, are you doing it in the most sustainable way that stops people from burning out and all of those things, but gives you fast feedback and all of that kind of stuff? In your book, you mentioned a slight difference in the definition between agility and agile. So having
yeah,
those two terms separated. So where some people might like, oh, well, we've tried agile in the past, thinking more of it from an agility perspective, more of an
exactly.
outcome
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I agree with that. Yeah, I think I talk about if agility is the ends, of organizational agility in response to this changing world of work. If agility, or adaptiveness, if people really want to use it, whatever word you want to use, that's fine. But if agility in that enterprise-wide sense, as a culture and as a mindset and as a capability, is the ends, well, agile is part of the means. So in
Yes,
other words,
yes.
it can help us. It can help us along the way, but so can other things. Psychological safety. Proper culture programs, proper resourcing, proper organization of work, organization models, technology, design thinking, practices. So it's not, agile won't get us there completely, but it
All by
certainly
itself.
can help
Mm,
us. And I think as a set of practices. So people say, "Oh, well, we prefer the kind of term adaptive. We want to be an adaptive organization." And I say, "Well, okay, tell me that. Tell me more about that. What practices, routines, what behaviors are you going to do tomorrow that's going to make you more adaptive?" Well, I don't know. It just sounds like a nice idea, and the, so I like that word too. Adaptive is fine. It evokes, I suppose, a sense of good intent, good
yes,
intention.
yes.
It evokes a sense of forward looking and optimism about being adaptive for
Mm,
future opportunity. It's all great. It evokes all that. But when you get to the detail about, well, give me the research behind that, show me the tools, show me the practices, show me the behaviors, the routines that will help teams to achieve that adaptability. Guess what? They lean on the agile kind of, portfolio of tools and so on. I think maybe the concern people have maybe a little bit is that if it goes too far, if those
mm,
wonderful, um, tools and practices and principles go too far, they become, as one of my colleagues calls it, another example of path dependency. In other words,
Yes.
we come dependent on that, and we feel that we have to learn everything, or that becomes the only way to. And of course, that's not true. Sometimes good old linear waterfall is the proper way to go, with some of our issues and problems. But the agility comes in which kind of lane do we move in? Which is it, a more agile? Do we need to lean on the agility type of kind of mindset, or do we need to lean on a more traditional linear mindset for the particular issue we're dealing with? So yeah, I think agility is this
Mm.
broader kind of goal, or state that we're looking for, a capability that we're looking for, and agile helps us to get there in measure.
One of the
Mm.
interesting things that you were saying in there is around kind of this idea around, with agile or with any technique, you
Mm.
can fall into the trap of just trying to follow best practice.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
that idea of talking about agility is kind of a really nice concept, actually, because you then are still keeping the flex in what's the best ways of working. So yes, for this one, we should do, a more linear approach because it's much more schedule and dependency management approach, and it's a known
Yeah.
space, much
Yeah.
more appropriate over there, rather than trying to fit something into a Scrum process
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
hope for the
Yeah.
best, just
Yeah.
because. So
Because we're
keeping away
dependent
from
on that
the
path.
because we're
Yeah,
dependent
exactly.
on it, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the challenges too that often I see, and you refer this in your book, is people focus in, oh, we're going to do an agile transformation. We want to become more adaptable and we'll focus on the teams. And it's all about the teams. But in your book, you talk about 3 levels of agility. Can you kind of give us a bit of a rundown on those 3 levels and what that means for leaders about where they should be thinking or investing?
Sure. Yeah, when I started quite naively to look at the agility challenge, I kind of went, well, okay, what does that mean? What does that look like? And then discover, well, what do we mean? Are we talking about, at the broadest level, the organizational enterprise wide? And yes, it would be wonderful to think that we were an agile organization. So, okay, well, how does that happen? So it is worthwhile engaging as we do, and we've got this tool called Scope, which is like a quick diagnostic for leadership teams to just look in the mirror and say, how agile are we as an organization? Just in terms of our culture and how we show up as leadership, and in our strategy, do we even value this, and do we communicate that through the organization? So there's
Mm,
some high level stuff at organizational level, and we can look at our culture, particularly, for instance, using other diagnostics, and kind of go, well, actually, how agile is our culture? So I think there's some organizational signposts, if you like, or criteria which we can apply that are fine and helpful. But again, that's quite removed from day to day. They, in fact, have probably put in a fourth level, even since the book, but certainly the functional or divisional level. So we mentioned HR, mentioned technology, but as you know, and I know, the finance function, procurement, etc., can ask the question, well, how agile are we in terms of
mm,
our, not just how agile are we internally as a function or a department, but actually, are we enabling or blocking agility for the organization? Are we blockers or are we enablers of agility? Very good question sometimes. And I know HR has to ask that all the time. So that's, I suppose, the organization level, the functional divisional level. But then the key level for me that you've identified and talked about is the team. And that's where probably the most focus has been, is,
mm,
okay, what are the practices and the routines we can do at team level to be, at least whatever the rest of the organization is doing, at least we can be as agile as we can be. And that's probably where the attention has gone. But I suppose one thing that came up for me in my sort of, again, naive or objective outsider looking at this, was, I said, there's very little attention on the individual,
mm.
on the individual's journey here. There's almost this assumption that individuals just get it,
Yeah.
or that they will get it, and just because we've made a decision at organization or functional or particularly at team level that we're going to be now more agile, and we do a couple of bits and pieces of training or something, and we come up with a few practices, we make this assumption that that's going down okay with employees,
Mm,
and so I got more into that to say, actually, what are we doing to support the individual in all of this? Because agility and agile really constitute, they infer change, don't they? They infer change, and probably continuous change, probably more change than we'd
Yes, yeah.
like. Well, that's taxing, isn't it? That's pretty heavy
Mm,
going on an employees. So are we, do we know when we ask individuals to be agile, do we know what we're asking? And do we understand how their reaction and how their skill set might be, and their comfort level? Because so we can talk a little bit more about that if you like, but I think that individual level is something new, because what else are teams or organizations but groups of individuals, right? So we do need to kind of think about this at the individual level in order for it to be sustainable as
mm.
a culture.
It does
Mm.
seem to be. I know in the military, their focus is on to get a really high optimized team, you have to have
Mm.
highly optimized individuals. And I suppose that parallels into our organizations. And like you say, each individual and how they might contribute from a team perspective. What's the attributes that we need to foster in individuals for them to be adaptable or have this
Yeah.
individual agility? What does that look like?
So that became, without even knowing it when I started off. Well, my research really was very, again, naively sort of around, well, what are the human, the organizational actually implications of future of work? And I thought that would be great. And so, that's a nice, interesting piece of work. And I remember my supervisor saying, Kevin, this initial proposal you have is fine if you've got the next 10 years to do it. So you need to boil it down. And I kind of went, well, at the core of this question about how we adapt to future of work is the individual's journey on this,
Mm,
and how do we help people not just cope with all the change in the world of work, but thrive, but actually thrive, and actually, because this change and pace of change is not going anywhere fast. So, and that became a journey around agility, and then around what that means, and we've mentioned that at organizational. So the boiling it down at individual level, what we did was we just did so work to really understand what those attributes of personal agility would look like. And it was interesting because some of them were pretty obvious, but it was the first time they'd been sort of packaged into a, if you want, a little model or a competency set. And there were six main things. One very obvious ones: a learning mindset. Right, this
mm,
curiosity, growth mindset kind of piece that was definitely there. There was this change ability, if you know what I mean, which is sort of a mixture of
yes.
this adaptability and also resilience, of course, being part of that too. Self-empowerment, the sense of having control and being able to, to control one's own actions and future. So it's that idea of self-empowerment and empowerment in general. And that brings in the psychological safety discussion and so on as well. Relationships, then the human piece came in. It was interesting. So the relationship management, the ability to be able to impact and influence folks, the ability to be able to network, and to
Mm,
form, and interesting. There's quite a lot of talk now about relational intelligence in the new world of work. So relations and the collaboration was a huge one in terms of being able to work with others. But it was interesting what the research showed was that the sort of most powerful of the six attributes was what we termed purposefulness. So it was very interesting, and
yes.
it was very evident from those folks who seemed to be thriving in a more agile environment as opposed to just coping. Those who were thriving in that environment had this sense of about what they were about. uh, they were kind of grounded in their values. They were self-aware of what their strengths were and what they were trying to do and what they wanted out of their work and their working life. And they were purpose-driven. And they were aligned with the purpose of the organization. They had a sense of, okay, well, to achieve this, we need to do that. And there was just a sense of purposefulness, and they were steady in themselves. They were kind of, they're rooted in, as I say, their values and what they were about. So those five or six attributes
Mm,
became what we've called over the last 5 or 6 years a personal agility model. And we
mm,
have diagnostics and so on. We're able to. There's various materials on it. Um, but what they have become, I suppose, amongst people we work with, is not just a skill set for adapting or dealing with the agile work environments in order so that they can continue to pivot and adapt. but also they have become, I suppose, what you might call a set of future fit skills. So as disruption hits them, not just in their team tasks, but actually in their work lives generally.
Mm.
So, what are the skills we need to thrive in the future of work? Well, actually, those skills help to at least start a conversation about, well, people, you can talk about digital skills and AI and everything else, but these are the more fundamental human skills, if you like, the transversal skills, the more constant, sustained skills that we kind of need. And if we have those skill set, if we have that skill set, we'll be able to adapt to whatever is thrown at us, whether that's in an agile work environment or whether it's redundancy or getting our job disrupted or automated and so on. So I think that's a very interesting area that we still needs more work. Actually, is this because there's a sense, isn't it, that people just get on with it and people sink or swim, isn't
Yes,
it? And
yes.
and we just teach them new skills like AI or agile methods or something, and just get on with it.
Yeah, a
Whereas,
process
you know,
or a thing.
yeah, yeah, transactional type of vocational skill. But what we were trying to get at is what are the underpinning behaviors and skills that are going to help people sustain in these fast moving environments, whether it's agile teams or whether it's just a fast pace of change in a technology company or whatever. So, interesting area, interesting area.
It sounds like there's two distinct camps in that the things of how I might manage or act myself, and then how I might interact with others.
It's
So
really
there's
good.
sort
Yeah.
of two
Mm.
different skill sets that, from a soft skill perspective, are really key going forward.
Yeah. No, you've picked up on that very, very well. Yeah, it's very true. Because again, when we looked at those six skills, we found three of them were completely on us as individuals. We couldn't
Mm,
look to anybody else to blame or whatever, or to create the environment. Like, so that purposefulness, learning mindset, and our change ability, those are things we can learn. They're skills, they're competencies. We've broken them down into actual behaviors. They're things that we can actually reflect on and be more self-aware about how we are doing in those skills. But the other ones that I mentioned, collaborative, relationship management, and empowerment, those skills are also individual skills, but they do have a dependency on the environment that we are
mm,
interacting with. So if I'm working in a very restrictive, traditional, you know, waterfall, hierarchical command and control environment, I'm not going to be able to really, you know, um, work on those skills or get too much opportunity around empowerment or collaborative or relationship. It's going to be very defined. Whereas if I have a
mm.
more open, flexible culture, I'm going to be able to use those skills to greater degree. So I think all the skills are individual, but you're dead right. Some of them will the environment, and that brings us back to the organizational agility, the culture in which agility needs to thrive in or happen in. That if you don't have an organizational culture that allows for empowerment and collaboration and relationship and networks, etc., then your best attempts at agile methods are going to
Mm.
ultimately uh, hit the sand. Mm.
And there's a degree of difficulty and time needed for people to transition from a more traditional culture into something that's much more open, much more reliant on you building relationships, and much more reliant on you effectively collaborating with others and all of those
Mm.
things. It's quite a shift for people to go through.
It's quite a shift, and I guess there's some good, and we highlight a few of them in the book, but there is, isn't it? I think Microsoft is quite famously, quoted, and I'm sure there's parts of Microsoft that don't feel like, that don't always live up to the reputation. But that whole shift, that what was it, from a know-it-all company to a learn-it-all company, like Satella made it quite a distinct, quite a simple way to just try to move that, shift that culture around just by those very, very high level
Mm,
statements. So rather than the know it all, which was more the linear command control silo type of culture, we want to be a more learn it all organization, collaborative, open, humble, transparent, experimental. Um, and I think we've seen the results of that actually in the last 10 years or so in the Microsoft story. So it's probably one of those more
mm,
um, more well-known stories about how it is possible with intention, but that's why for it to really happen culturally, it must be led, isn't it, from the top? But then you've got to
Yeah.
have the practices lower down, though, that to be able to execute that. We've had several diagnostics where organizationally they seem to be doing all the right things, but they're still getting stuck in the weeds because they haven't translated that great intention. You know,
Mm,
say take that, uh, know it all to learn it all intention. They haven't translated that into actual commitment and training and practices and routines at the those other levels we talked about, the functional, team and individual level. And of course, overlapping all those three or four levels is the leadership agility
yeah.
question. Where, and I know your experience would be huge here, where you just see evidence of that all the time, whether that is actually happening or isn't happening at leader level, and
Mm.
the consequences of that, positive and negative, are so clear.
Maybe a good question, one of our kind of final questions to wrap up on then is, if I'm a leader listening to this at the moment, what would be some questions you would advise me to think about for me to understand whether I have the leadership agility, whether I'm investing in my time the right way? What are some of the considerations that you would advise a leader to be looking at when they're thinking about leadership agility?
Mm. It's it's a good one. There's so much literature out here, and there's so many models around, agile leadership, whether it's Bill Joyner or whether it's, transformational leadership and so on. And what we've attended to do, because it's a tough job being a leader today, and
Oh,
particularly in the
yeah,
middle management side. Oh my gosh,
yeah,
and oh, you want me to be agile one day, you want me to be linear another day, you want me to be, I have to attend to the financial results another day, and then so there's so much going on, stakeholder management, managing up, managing down, and uh, what we do with leaders in terms of saying, well, if it is an intention of yours, a genuine intention to be more adaptive or agile as a leader, there's sort of four habits. If you roll up all those kind of good research and practices into sort of habits, or
yeah.
hacks, if you like, that these agile leaders seem to deploy. Um, and we've called it under the four C's. And one is helping their teams with clarity, just providing clarity, and that could be around the prioritization of work, or it could be having an openness about and transparency around the amount of work that's in our backlog, and deciding on whether it's going to take a more linear approach or more agile approach, or whether we're going to stand up a scrum team here or we're not, or whatever. So providing some clarity as to the work that we are doing, and why we're doing it, and the purpose behind why we're making this decision versus this
Mm,
decision. So clarity is a thing that people really yearn for in a fast moving environment. So that was one. And then shaping culture then was another one. So the idea of just role modeling the type of behaviors you want to see amongst your team. So that openness, that humility, that uh, authenticity, the agile values, if they're important to us, then let's be seen to role model those,
mm,
so that people see it's okay to fail, it's okay to ask questions, it's okay to ask the silly question. Um, and enabling change as a third one. So in other words, being a sort of a catalyst for change. That change is okay. Change is going to require us making mistakes. Change is going to require some experimentation. But I'm going to, as a leader, my job is going to be to enable this group to be able to change and change better, to get them the resources they need, and then get the hell out of their way. That
yeah.
idea. So providing the clarity, shaping the culture, providing and enabling change. But the fourth one that really just does seem to resonate, or underpin all the other ones, is creating connection just with people. It's just
Oh,
is
yeah.
is is just that connection at individual levels. So the trust and psychological safety piece, that I feel at a human level, that I've connected with people enough for them to trust me, and I trust them. I have their back, and they know they have, and so therefore they're comfortable to come to me, etc., etc. So what one leader said to us is that these were kind of handy, because they were at least four habits that at the end of the week, I could say to myself, have I done what I can to create an environment for agility to happen?
Yes.
Or actually, if I think about how I closed down a discussion here, or I didn't, I defaulted to type there, I could do better next week. So it's this iterative piece that the four C's just allows them some little bit of a hack to keep themselves directionally
And a nice
agile.
simple hack.
Yeah, and one that they where they can forgive themselves and say, look, I'm not going to be perfect, and even saying that to the team. Like sometimes under pressure, we're going to default to a
Yeah.
very unagile kind of approach. But you know what? We're going to acknowledge that, and we're going to move on and be better, etc. And that's part of this role modeling of the
Yes.
of the culture, right? Acknowledging the shortcoming and seeing how it can be done better. So what we found as well is that those hacks or those ideas, they took pressure off the shoulders of leaders as well. That they didn't have to be perfect. They didn't have to be the knight on the white horse and having all the answers. That they were actually
Mm.
able to show humility and say to their team, "Look, I'm trying these habits and behaviors. Help me, to help you," sort of thing. And together, we as a team, we have shared accountability for the success. And I'm going to try and do my best to facilitate this environment in which we
Mm.
can thrive and be sustainable. So it's just I hope that helps. But that's just like that's sort of a starter of a conversation about what are the
It's great.
habits we need and what is most likely to lead to success, because there's no such thing as a unicorn manager. It's a tough job. It's a tough job, and
Yes.
striving to perfection is just one way ticket to burnout, I think, these days.
And probably misery. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Final question then. For those interested in the future of work, what's your top five trends or top three, however many you like, that you think leaders should be most aware of? Like there is so much change and
Mm.
so many labels out there.
Mm.
Is there any particular ones that you think, hey, here's something for leaders to be thinking about?
That's a trick question. I haven't even thought about that, but it's one of
Mm.
the things we do, Bianca, is in something that's become more of a trend now, actually, is and more of a deliberate approach is to actually come up with a future of work strategy that
Mm.
is a future work strategy for us. So forget about the rest of the world, forget about, but if we, so what we do is we get them to look at all those sort of top 8 or 10 trends. So everything, globalization, technology, AI, workforce planning, all of the,
Mm.
ones you can see, you can Google them, um, and,
Yeah.
uh, and say, right, which of these are more applicable to us and which aren't. So globalization, for instance, may not be, so on. So the scarcity of talent may not be, in terms of workforce planning, the gig economy may not be really something to, so filter out those top 8 or 10 into those two or three that are. So the point is that nobody has got the same. There'll be overlap, but those top three will be different for any organization, and the more
Yes.
real
Yeah.
they are and grounded in our reality, the more likely it is we're going to get resonance with the board, the senior
Mm.
team, and throughout. And what we're finding is that those, in filtering out those three maximum four themes. For one client at the moment now, for instance, it's organizational agility. It's about the adaptiveness piece. It's about the workforce, the talent side, about talent deployment and being more flexible around how
Mm.
we employ talent, but it's all about talent and skills. So, and the third is around flexibility. So building on the hybrid piece. So rather than going backwards, we're going to go forwards with our flexible work. And we know that work is going to get more fragmented and it's going to be more automated and AI. So we're going to remain on this journey of flexibility, organizational agility, and skills and talent. So so you might pick those. I would think those are actually high up any top five. But in this particular case, it was their top three, which was the important
Yes.
thing,
Yes.
rather than some generic, list from that doesn't necessarily resonate. And the next step for that company is to try some experiments around those three issues to actually probe and test, well, what could we do differently in those areas.
Mm.
And that brings us back to a kind of an agile approach to progressing those tasks, because we've got a lot of other short-term stuff that we've got to do as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's nice. So I guess we're wrapping up everything from the strategy and keeping future of work more actively assessed and thought about and what's relevant, and then bringing that into your strategy, right down into
Exactly.
then how do we build all of the practices and habits we need across those levels you talked about, which is, the organization, the function, the team, and the individual. And those two last connecting factors about the leadership agility and the individual agility
Mm,
that kind of sticks it all together.
together. Yeah, no,
It's a big
that's really,
space.
it's a big space, and I think it's so. If some people, for instance, I know certainly talking to colleagues this part of the world, are a little bit, I guess, deflated about maybe where the agile movement piece is going, in terms of maybe some teams being stood down and, oh, we tried that, it hasn't worked, things have moved on, and so on. And I'm kind of go, well, hold on to that thought here for a second, because everything I'm seeing from a future of
Mm,
work point of view, and no future of work strategy I've ever worked on doesn't include in its top three the idea of organizational adaptability, agility, flexibility, whatever term they've chosen. And what that inevitably leads to, or has led to, then, is a conversation about, well, how do we
mm,
bring this aspired state of more adaptability or agility that we're saying is really important for our sector and for our survival and our sustainability? How do we bring this concept or this intention to reality? Guess
yeah.
what they end up talking about is practices, routines, team ways of working.
Yeah.
So maybe labeled differently, maybe coming from a different space, maybe not coming with it with the fanfare of an agile transformation type
Yes.
of origin, but equally valid, though, in terms of the resultant need for coaching
Mm,
and coaching skills and facilitation skills in order to be able to help people with this change, because it is change, and that brings us back to the leadership and then the individual. We've got to help individuals um, with this journey, and we've got to be able to coach and help leaders to lead as best they can, to
yeah.
make it sustainable and not dependent on a set of practices or tools, but actually more of a cultural
Yes.
and intuitive way of working for the future. So I
It
think that's where it
it's
is.
sounds
Mm.
good. And it reminds me that I think more and more it's less about an agile transformation and more about how do we build the capabilities for continuous evolution in our organizations. That's where we need to focus, not on a do we go from point A to point B, like there's some sort of Cinderella state.
I know, yeah, it's a cultural. It
Yeah.
really is a cultural piece, and for culture to shift in the way you asked, and we use the Microsoft agenda, the Microsoft example. If you're serious about a cultural shift, then you've got to deal with the leadership question in terms of how it's role modeled and rolled out. But you've also ultimately got to get to the individual level. What does this mean for me, and how is this going to serve me in my future, in my
Mm,
career? Why should I change? Tell me, what's going to make this worth my while? And if it means I can be more future proofed and future fit, and you're giving me some skills that I can use, then okay, I'll listen. But if you're telling me it's just another process I have to follow, then I'm less enthused.
yes, yes. How do people find out more about you, find your book, all of those sorts of things? Where would they go to?
Oh, not too hard to find in this day and age. So Kevin Empey on LinkedIn, I guess, is probably an obvious place to start. And workmatters.ie. There's a few Work Matters around, but the one where we share our information and book and articles and all that sort of stuff, what we do is workmatters.ie.
Okay, great. And we'll
Yeah,
put the link in the
thank you.
description for people as
Cool.
well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Been a
so much for your
pleasure.
time today. I know it's your evening, so I
Yeah, not
appreciate
at
you
all.
taking the time out.
Not at all. Not at all. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, and thanks all for listening.